Welcome to this Impact Pathways Explainer. This is a quick guide covering what impact pathways are, why they're important, when to consider them, and how you identify and develop them for your work. This resource has been developed by IPEN, the Impact Planning and Evaluation Network, as part of their wider efforts to collaboratively develop shared tools and resources to support impact from research for CRIs and the wider science and innovation and technology system here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Setting the scene. What is an impact pathway? So the first point to know is that there is no one definition of what an impact pathway is. And in that regard, it's similar to the concept of impact, and this can create confusion in the sector, both with regards to the definition of impact, but also reference to impact pathways. The closest that you will see written in the sector's documentation is MBIE's reference to implementation pathways. If you go looking for definitions elsewhere, what you'll find is definitions that are roughly equivalent to how you would describe what a program logic is, i.e., that it's how your inputs and activities from research then progress towards outputs and outcomes. What IPEN has found through its work with the sector is that there is a need for more than just this generic definition, and hence this explainer. So, why develop an impact pathway? Well, it comes down to the fact that when research is being commissioned, it's not so much the research that is being commissioned, but rather the potential you, through your research, can create for impact. What IPEN has done through some of its work is to describe this process as a cycle. This diagram clearly highlights some of the aspects that are critical to supporting impact creation. What you'll see here are some parts of the process that you might recognize from a program logic, but a few additional steps that you wouldn't typically see, such as partnerships and trust, the ideation and co-development process of what is the research problem or opportunity, and then the step between outputs and outcomes around uptake and use. And finally, having te tiriti, bicultural partnerships and dual knowledge systems at the centre. What you'll also see, this area shown in blue, is simply highlighting that this is the section research is formally funded or contracted. The spot where research typically becomes unstuck in its ambitions for impact can be shown between this outputs and uptake and use section, which is sometimes referred to as the valley of death. Where it shows impact pathways is that these sit and fit behind and at all stages around the cycle. So impact pathways are connected throughout this whole impact creation process. So what we're fundamentally talking about and covering in this short explainer is how to strengthen impact creation. We are doing this already in our system, but we know that there is more that could be done. This is about identifying and developing strong or stronger pathways to impact. And by doing this, help to overcome that valley of death and using a set of key tools and concepts and applying the KISS principle to help you get around the cycle. When we talk about impact pathways, the analogy that is often used is that of a map, particularly when we're talking about what a program logic is and what or how or when it can be useful. So you start with the issues or the problem, you finish or end with your long-term impacts that you're wanting your research to contribute to, and then showing that clear line of sight through your research from the opportunity or the problem to those longer-term outcomes and impacts. But what we find when we're moving from outputs to impact, and even when research is carefully planned out using something like a program logic or similar, it can still hit the skids as it's trying to move from those outputs into those short-term and longer-term outcomes. So why is that? Well, the why is where this research valley of death occurs. This gap. This is where great research can go to die. Now, this is not any reflection of the quality of the work, the teams involved, and so on. What it reflects is broader, more complex systemic challenges. IPEN's work has been focused on helping bridging this gap, and with the benefit of the collective wisdom it's gathered via its joined-up efforts to build capability across the system, it's developed some context-specific insights around this challenging part of the process. So what does this mean when we map the concept of impact pathways against the program logic? What it fundamentally means is to overcome it, we need to be thinking about impact pathways at all stages. Impact pathways are facilitated by a number of things, including different actors and the relationships that people have with them, how they're engaged and the way knowledge is mobilized by and with them, which then supports uptake and use of research. And strengthening this is also supported by continuous improvement. So you'll see that those feedback cycles are occurring all the way through. So really recognizing that to strengthen your pathways to impact, you need to be thinking about more than just your inputs and activities and outputs. You need to be thinking about a more diverse range of activities and considerations shown by those points below. So what that means in practice is asking some more specific questions. Up until now, the best tool that we've had, and it's a good one, has been the impact planning tool developed by AgResearch as part of their Beyond Results program from a few years ago. But IPEN saw that more detailed guidance was needed because as research occurs such a huge wide variety of contexts, although this is a really useful generic tool, some more focused support and guidance was really what was being asked for through a lot of the workshops and webinars and other engagements that IPEN has had with the sector over the previous few years. So what IPEN has done has engaged the Brains Trust across the IPEN members and also through engagement with the wider sector, including universities, MB and others such as KiwiNet, and created a diagram. What this shows is that there are 5 main pathways to impact. You can see policy pathway, practice or practice change pathway, a pathway via public and the community, commercialisation, which is usually fairly well known, and then kaupapa Māori. What you'll also see in addition to these 5 is the recognition that research often also seeks to contribute to what we've called here underpinning pathways. That includes knowledge, both in the conventional Western sense and also mātauranga Māori, and other underpinning pathways of capability, relationships, and infrastructure. If we use that map analogy for a program logic, the 5 pathways are a little bit like the different routes that you might take. So from the previous one, you could take the coastal route or you could take the inland route from Christchurch to Picton, although in a research sense, you could actually go down both at the same time. Whereas the underpinning pathways are a little bit more like the energy that's driving you forward. So you could use the analogy of solar power. You need to leverage these resources, but you're also regenerating or building on them through the research process itself. So when we map this diagram back into or back onto the program logic, this is where you can see it fitting. The 5 pathways sitting as that bridge between outputs and outcomes, and those underpinning pathways feeding back into the system's assets or resources, which will then be used for a future piece of research. So escaping the valley of death is ultimately about building stronger bridges from activities and outputs across to outcomes, and that the stronger bridge can occur via one or several pathways.